when my daughter-in-law Anya looked at me with those tired, resolute eyes and said, "Mom, I think it's best if you go back home now." I didn't cry. I didn't argue, I just smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, that smile. It felt like the last leaf clinging to a winter tree. She had called me Mom. She had said that word, the one that had felt like a warm blanket for 10 years. And in that moment, as she was asking me to leave, I held onto the word, not the request. It was the last time she would ever call me that, and I didn't know. Subscribe to my channel if this story touches your heart. If you understand the quiet aches of family, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with a friend who might need to hear it. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Ilara. My life for the longest time was a quiet one. I lived in the same small town I was born in a house that echoed after my husband Leo passed away. The silence was my biggest companion, and it was a heavy one. Then there was my son Ben, my bright, wonderful boy. He was the bridge between my quiet world and the noisy, bustling one out there. When he met Anya, I saw a light in him I hadn't seen before. She was city bright, with a laugh that could cut through any gloom. She was an artist, her hands always stained with paint or clay. I was a little in awe of her. When they got married, I gained a daughter. The first time she hugged me and called me Mom, my heart, which had felt so shriveled, unfurled a little. It was a gift. When my grandson, Jamie, was born, that feeling multiplied into a joy so vast it scared me sometimes. I sold my house. I left my town, my friends, the familiar shadows of my old life. I moved into their cozy, chaotic home in the city to help. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a rescue. They rescued me from the silence. For years I believed I was rescuing them too, from the chaos of new parenthood, from the stress of 2 careers. I found my purpose in the warm steam of baby formula, in the endless piles of tiny laundry. In the rhythm of lullabies. Anya would come home tired from her studio and I'd have dinner waiting. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," she'd say, kissing my cheek. Ben would look at us, his girls, and his smile was my son. We were a team, a family. I thought it would always be that way. Life, however, has a gentle way of shifting the ground beneath your feet, so slowly you don't feel the crack forming until you're already falling. The first signs were not signs at all, not to me. They were just life. Jamie started school. He didn't need me to tie his shoes or read to him for hours anymore. He had friends, homework, a world that existed outside of my arms. Anya's art began to take off. She got a big gallery show. She was busier, more preoccupied. The tired lines on her face were now from passion, not exhaustion. I was so proud of her, but the house felt different, quieter during the day. My tasks shrank. I would finish the cleaning by noon and then, I started cooking more elaborate meals, trying to find my place, to make my contribution necessary. "Mom, you didn't have to go to all this trouble," Anya would say, pushing food around her plate, her mind clearly on a canvas upstairs. "It's no trouble," I'd say, but the words felt heavier than before. Ben was rising in his company, traveling more. The dinners where all 4 of us sat together became events, not routines. I started to hear pieces of conversations behind closed doors, not arguments. Not really, just a low hum of discussion. "We should talk about," or "maybe it's time we considered." I would turn the faucet on or start the vacuum cleaner, a strange heat creeping up my neck. I didn't want to overhear. I told myself it was just marriage, just the flow of a busy life. But the space I occupied in the home began to feel less like a warm corner and more like a piece of furniture that was slightly in the way. One evening, I was arranging the photo frames on the mantelpiece, as I often did. I liked to keep them in order. Anya came in, watching me. She said softly, "You know, Mom, you don't have to do that. I can manage the little things." It was said with kindness, but it felt like a tiny pinprick in the balloon of my purpose. The little things, my whole world had become the little things. I just smiled and said, "I like doing it." But that night in my bed I wondered for the first time, what am I really doing here? The seasons changed. Jamie's 7th birthday came and went with a party at a climbing gym, not at home with my homemade cake and games. I understood, of course, times change. Children want different things, but I had spent a week practicing a dinosaur cake design he once loved. The bakery cake was perfect, covered in fancy fondant. He loved it. I smiled, took photos, and later, alone in the kitchen, I scraped the perfectly good practice cake into the bin. It felt like throwing away a language I alone still spoke. Ben was away on that trip. It was just Anya, Jamie, and me in the house that night, the quiet after the party's storm. I was washing up when Anya came in, leaning against the doorway. She looked thoughtful. "Mom," she began, and my heart did its usual little lift at the word. Now that Jamie's so independent and with my work going well, you must get bored here all day. Have you thought about maybe joining a club or a gardening group? There's a great community centre." Her voice was warm, encouraging. It was a suggestion from a place of love. "I know that, but to me it sounded like a gentle nudge towards the door, a redirection of my energy away from their home and into the wide world where I no longer felt I belonged." "Oh, I'm not bored," I said, perhaps too quickly, the dishcloth tight in my hand. "There's always plenty to do." She nodded, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a smile of someone who has said what they needed to say and now must wait. That was the beginning of the quiet distance. A space grew between us, filled not with words but with unsaid things. I tried harder. I redoubled my efforts. If my purpose was the home, I would make it flawless. I organized closets Anya had left in creative disarray for years. I folded her artist's smocks, stiff with dried paint, thinking she might be grateful for the order. I came across a sketchpad left open on the dining table. It was filled with beautiful, frantic lines, drawings of our home, but in the drawings the rooms were empty, just light and shadow and furniture. No people. I closed the book quickly, a cold feeling in my stomach. Was that how she saw it, just a space? I told myself I was being foolish. An artist sees shapes, not stories. Then came the Saturday of the furniture. Ben was home, we were all having a slow breakfast. Anya was buzzing with energy. She sold a big piece. She wanted to celebrate by refreshing the living room. "I've been looking at sofas all week," she said, her eyes bright. "I found this gorgeous, modern one, sleek lines. It'll really open up the space." She showed us pictures on her phone. It was beautiful, and it looked nothing like the comfortable, worn sofa we were all sitting on, the sofa where I'd cuddled Jamie through 100 fevers. Where Ben and I had watched his old childhood movies, where Anya and I had sat up late talking when she was nursing. That sofa held the shape of our family. I looked at Ben. He was nodding, smiling at her excitement. "Whatever you want, honey, it's your domain, your domain." The words were innocent, but they echoed. I cleared my throat. "What will happen to this old one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, we'll donate it," Anya said, already scrolling to another image. "It's had a good life." I looked down at my tea. "It's had a good life." Was that all, just an object to be replaced when it no longer fit the new design? I felt a sudden, fierce attachment to that lumpy couch. It was my anchor in this home, but I said nothing. My opinion hadn't been sought. I was part of the old landscape, quietly being updated. The new sofa arrived the following week. It was as beautiful and cold as in the pictures. Nobody sank into it. We perched. The room looked larger, emptier. My old reading lamp didn't match, so it was moved to a corner. The room no longer felt like our living room. It felt like a showroom. And I felt like a visitor who had overstayed, my style a relic in a modern museum. The cold feeling in my stomach became a constant companion. I moved through the house more softly, as if trying not to disturb the new atmosphere that had settled in. I started to notice other changes. Jamie, who used to run to me first with every scraped knee or school story, now saved his biggest news for his parents. "Wait till Dad gets home, I'll tell him," he'd say, or Mom said she'd help me with that project. It was natural, he was growing, but each time it was a small stone added to a growing pile in my heart. One afternoon, I overheard him on a video call with a friend. "Yeah, my grandma lives with us," he said with the casual tone of a child stating a fact. Then he added, "I wish I had my own game room." The friend's voice, tinny through the speaker, said something I couldn't hear. Jamie laughed. "I know, right, it's kinda weird, kinda weird." I stood frozen in the hallway, holding a basket of laundry that suddenly felt 1,000 pounds heavy. I was Nana who spoiled him. I was the grandma who took up space where a game room could be. I put the basket down and went to my room, the guest room, though I'd stopped calling it that years ago. I sat on the bed and looked at my hands. They were good hands. They had rocked Barbies, cooked meals, tended gardens, held my husband. Now they just felt unused. Ben sensed a shift in me, my sweet boy. He'd knock on my door in the evening. "Everything okay, Mom? You seem quiet." How could I explain it? To say I felt obsolete would sound ungrateful, dramatic. They had given me a home, a family. Wasn't that enough? It had to be. So I would paste on a smile. "Just a little tired, sweetheart, don't worry about me." He'd hug me, and for a moment the old warmth was there. But when he left, the silence in the room was louder than ever. He was living in the present, in his busy, thriving life. I was living in the past. In the memory of when I was needed. We were in the same house, but we were on different islands. The real turning point began with something so small. A spoon. Anya had a special wooden spoon. Her grandmother had given it to her. It was clumsy-looking, worn smooth from decades of use. She never cooked with it, but it sat in a beautiful jar on the kitchen windowsill, a treasured artifact. One morning I was cleaning. I took all the items out of the jar to dust. My hands, I don't know, they fumbled. The spoon slipped. It hit the edge of the tile counter and snapped clean in two. The sound was like a bone breaking. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. I stared at the two pieces of dark wood in my palm, feeling a horror that was completely disproportionate to the object. But it wasn't just an object. It was a legacy, a connection to a line of women that I was not part of. I tried to fix it. I found wood glue and carefully, so carefully joined the break. I held it together for a long time. When I let go, it seemed to hold. I placed it back in the jar, the faint line of the break visible only if you knew to look. I thought maybe she wouldn't notice. I was wrong. She noticed that evening. I saw her pause at the jar, her fingers reaching in to touch the spoon. She went still. She didn't say anything, not then, but a wall went up, I could feel it. The easy, warm exchanges we used to have over coffee evaporated. She was polite, always polite. But the mom that came from her lips now sounded formal, like a title, not an endearment. The air in the house grew thick with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to apologize, to explain it was an accident, but the fear of her disappointment, of confirming my clumsiness. My intrusion into her sacred things kept me silent. My silence became guilt, and my guilt made me smaller, more hesitant. I was tiptoeing through my own life. The breaking of the spoon felt like a symbol. I had broken something intangible. The fragile trust that I was a caretaker of this home, not just an occupant. I had crossed a line from help into interference, and I didn't know how to cross back. A week after the spoon, Ben left for what he called a career-defining business trip. He'd be gone for 10 days. The house felt different with him away. He was the bridge, the translator between Anya's world and mine. Without him, the space between us felt vast and uncrossable. We moved around each other with careful choreography, two satellites in silent, separate orbits. Meals were quiet affairs with Jamie chattering, his voice the only sound stitching the silence together. Anya would retreat to her studio earlier and earlier. I'd hear the soft click of her door latch, a sound that began to feel like a dismissal. Then one night Jamie spiked a fever. It came on quickly. One moment he was fine, the next he was flushed and shivering. My old instincts roared to life. This was my domain, my purpose. I went into his room, placed a cool cloth on his forehead, humming the same lullaby I'd sung to Ben. Anya came in, her hair tied up, worry etching lines on her face. "I've got it," I said softly, confidently. "You go rest. I'll sit with him." For a second I saw the old Anya, the young mother, grateful for the backup. But then her expression changed. It hardened just slightly. "No, Mom, it's okay. I'm his mother. I'll take care of him." The words were not unkind, but they were firm. A boundary drawn clearly in the dim light of the nightlight. I'm his mother. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but deafening, and you are not. I withdrew my hand from Jamie's forehead as if it had been strung. I nodded, my throat tight. "Of course," I whispered and left the room. I stood outside his door for a long time, listening to her gentle murmurs, the sound of her pouring medicine. I felt a pain so sharp it was physical. For 7 years, caring for him had been my deepest joy, my reason for being here. And now that too was being gently, firmly taken back. I was being retired from grandmotherhood. I went to the kitchen and made tea I didn't drink, watching the steam rise and vanish. The home I had built my life around was quietly, systematically being rebuilt without me, and I had no blueprint for what came next. The final break happened 2 days later. It was a Thursday. Rain tapped against the windows. Anya had a meeting at the gallery and asked if I could be home when Jamie got off the school bus. "Of course," I said, almost desperately grateful for a task, a purpose. The bus came. Jamie ran up the path, his backpack bouncing, but he wasn't alone. 3 of his friends tumbled in after him, laughing and shouting, trailing mud and energy. "Nana, we're having an impromptu playdate," Jamie announced, his fever forgotten. His friends chorused a "Hi, Jamie's grandma," before rushing to the living room, the new, pristine living room. Panic, cold and immediate, shot through me. Anya was so particular about the new furniture, about the order of things. "Boys, shoes off," I called, my voice too high. "Let's play in the kitchen, the floor is easier to clean." But they were already on the sofa, a bag of chips one of them had pulled out, threatening to spill. It was chaos. Wonderful, normal childhood chaos, but all I could see was the potential for disaster. A stain on the light fabric, a scratch on the wood. I became a whirlwind of anxiety, following them with a towel, nudging drinks away from the table edge. I was not fun Nana. I was the police. I saw the disappointment on Jamie's face. Nana, relax, he said, in a tone that sounded too much like his mother. His friends grew subdued under my nervous watch. Then it happened. One of the boys, reaching for a toy car that had rolled, knocked over the jar on the windowsill. It happened in slow motion. The jar tilted, spun, and crashed to the floor. Shards of glass exploded like ice across the tiles. And there in the middle of the glittering wreckage lay the 2 pieces of the wooden spoon. The glued break had held, but the new fall had shattered it into several fragments. The room went utterly silent. The boys stared wide-eyed. Jamie looked at me, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Nana," he whispered. At that exact moment the front door opened. Anya was home early. She stood in the doorway, her coat dripping, taking in the scene, the glass, the mud, the boys frozen in guilt, and me standing helplessly in the center of it all, holding a towel like a flag of surrender. Her eyes went from the mess to the broken spoon and finally to me. There was no anger on her face. That would have been easier. There was just a profound, weary disappointment, a finality. "Boys," she said, her voice eerily calm. "It's time to go home. Jamie, please go wait in your room." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The boys scrambled for their coats and were gone. Jamie fled upstairs. It was just the 2 of us, standing in the wreckage of glass and wood and something much more fragile. I opened my mouth. "Anya, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I tried to fix it before I—" The words tumbled out, pathetic and pleading. She held up a hand. She didn't look at me. She looked at the broken spoon. "Please don't," she said. Her voice was hollow. "Just don't." She got the dustpan and brush and began to sweep up the glass, each scrape of the bristles on the tile sounding like a sentence being passed. I stood there, useless. I had broken her treasure. I had failed to protect her home. I had become a source of chaos, not peace. In that moment I saw myself through her eyes, not a help but a burden, not a mother but a problem that needed to be solved. She finished cleaning, emptied the dustpan, and without another word walked upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close. That was the loudest sound of all. I knew then with a cold certainty that my time here was over. The family I had clung to had gently, and now not so gently, outgrown me. I had stayed too long at the party, and now the lights were coming on, showing the mess that remained. I went to my room and began slowly to pack a suitcase. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't stay. The realization was a quiet, devastating storm. The home was no longer mine, and I had no idea where home was. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, my small suitcase open like a gaping mouth beside me. The house was so quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. I listened to the soft sounds of the family sleeping, the distant hum of Jamie's humidifier, the creak of the floorboards as Anya moved in her room. These were the sounds that had been my lullaby for a decade. Tonight they were a farewell song. I realized I wasn't just packing clothes. I was packing up a version of myself, the version that was Mom to Anya and Nana to Jamie in this house. Who would I be when I walked out the door? I didn't know. The fear of that emptiness was worse than the pain of leaving. The next morning I got up early. I made coffee. I made pancakes, Jamie's favorite, cutting them into the dinosaur shapes he used to love. I was performing the last rites of my role. Anya came down first. She looked tired, her eyes avoiding mine. The polite distance had solidified into a wall of ice. "Good morning," she said, her voice formal. "Pancakes are ready," I said too cheerfully. "Thank you," she said, but didn't take a plate. She just poured coffee and leaned against the counter, looking out at the rain-washed garden. The silence was unbearable. I had to be the one to say it, to make it real. "Anya," I began, my voice trembling slightly, I think it's time for me to go back home." She turned to look at me then. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a deep, resigned sadness, and perhaps a flicker of relief which hurt more than anger ever could. She took a slow sip of her coffee as if gathering her words. "Mom," she said, and the word which had once been a shelter now felt like a key turning in a lock. "I think that might be for the best." She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't ask me to stay. She simply agreed with the truth I had voiced. The finality of it took my breath away. Jamie came bounding down then, oblivious to the seismic shift in his world. "Dinosaur pancakes," he yelled, and for a moment everything was normal. He hugged me, his small arms around my waist. "You're the best, Nana." I held him tight, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, memorizing the feel of him. I knew I would have to tell him, but not now. Not in this fragile moment. Later, after Ben's flight landed, Anya called him. I heard the low murmur of her voice from the studio. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I was in my room folding a sweater when my phone rang. It was Ben. Mom, his voice was strained, confused. Anya just called, what's going on? She said you're talking about leaving. My heart broke for him, my son caught in the middle. It's just time, Ben, I said, forcing my voice to be calm to sound sure. Jamie's big, you're both so busy, you don't need me underfoot anymore. Don't need you, Mom, that's not true, you're not underfoot, this is your home. He sounded desperate and I loved him for it, but he was wrong, it wasn't my home, not anymore. A home is where you belong, where you are woven into the daily fabric. I had become a loose thread, snagging on everything. We can talk when I get back tomorrow, he said. Just wait, okay, please. I agreed, but I knew talking wouldn't change anything. The understanding had already happened, wordlessly, between Anya and me. It was in the broken spoon, in the quiet meals, in the way she now called me Mom with a careful politeness. She needed her space, her home, her family, her life, back, and I needed to remember who I was outside of being their anchor. Ben came home the next evening. He looked exhausted from travel and worry. We had dinner, a stilted, awful meal. Jamie, sensing the tension, was quiet. After he went to bed, the three of us sat in the living room, the new, uncomfortable sofa a perfect symbol of everything. Let's talk about this, Ben said, looking from Anya to me. This is crazy. Mom, you can't just leave. Anya took a deep breath. She looked at her hands, then at me. Her eyes were full of a painful honesty. Ben, she said softly, it's not crazy, we've all changed, the house, it's so full. Jamie needs his own space as he gets older. I need space to breathe, to just be in my own home without feeling like I'm managing another adult's life. She turned her gaze to me and it was not unkind, it was just true. You've been wonderful, Mom. But you're not happy here anymore, I see it. You're trying so hard to be needed and it's making you, and us, stressed. This isn't how it should be. Her words landed one by one with a quiet, devastating accuracy. She saw me. She saw my unhappiness, my clinging, she named it. And in naming it she released us both. Ben looked devastated. So that's it, he said, his voice thick. After all Mom has done for us. It's because of all she's done that this is hard, Anya said, a tear finally escaping. But love isn't a debt, Ben. We can't keep her here out of guilt. And she can't stay out of obligation. It's hurting everyone. I looked at my son's anguished face and at my daughter-in-law's tear-streaked, resolute one, and I knew Anya was right. I was staying out of fear of being alone, fear of being useless, and my fear was casting a shadow on their light. My love had become a weight. The most painful lesson of all is realizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let go. I reached over and took Ben's hand. She's right, my love, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My job here is done, and it was the best job I ever had, but it's time for you to be the family you are now, and it's time for me to remember who I am. The decision was made in that quiet, tear-filled living room, not with shouting but with a whispered, heartbreaking consensus. We would help Jamie understand. I would go back to my old town. Not to my old house, it was gone, but to a small apartment, a place of my own. The plan was practical, gentle. We would part with love, not with strife. But knowing it was right didn't make it hurt any less. It felt like a slow, careful unraveling of my own soul. The week that followed was a strange, suspended time. It was filled with a painful, deliberate kindness. We were all so careful with each other, like people carrying a priceless, cracked vase to a new shelf. We told Jamie together. He cried, he didn't understand. But why, Nana, don't you love us anymore? That question was a knife to my heart. I held him and told him I loved him more than the moon and the stars, and that sometimes love means giving people space to grow. He didn't really get it. He just clung to me a little tighter for those last few days. Ben helped me find a small apartment back in my hometown. It had a window that looked out onto a maple tree. It was quiet. The silence I had fled a decade ago was now my destination. I felt a strange numbness as we packed up my room. 10 years of life fit into a dozen boxes. The mementos felt like artifacts from another civilization. Photos of Jamie as a baby, a mug he'd made me in kindergarten, a scarf Anya had given me for Mother's Day years ago. I packed them all. They were my history, even if they were no longer my present. The day before I left, Anya came to my room. She had a small box in her hands. She looked nervous. I wanted to give you this, she said, holding it out. Inside was the broken wooden spoon. She had done something beautiful to it. She had taken the fragments and set them in a clear resin block like a fossil in amber. The cracks were still visible, but they were now part of the art, sealed in something strong and clear. It's not fixed, she said softly. But it's preserved. It's its own thing now. I thought you should have it. I took the heavy block in my hands. I could feel the tears coming hot and fast. This was her apology and her forgiveness all in one. An acknowledgement that something had broken and that it could never go back to what it was, but that it could be made into something new with its history honestly displayed. Thank you, I whispered, my voice cracking. It's beautiful. For a moment we just looked at each other, two women who had loved the same people, who had tried to share a home, and who had gotten lost in the translation. There were no hugs, but the ice had melted, leaving behind a landscape of sad, soft understanding. The morning of my departure was bright and sunny, cruelly cheerful. My suitcases were by the door. Ben's eyes were red-rimmed. Jamie was holding my hand, not letting go. We stood in the hallway, a portrait of a family breaking apart in the gentlest way possible. And then Anya spoke. She looked at me, her eyes full of a complicated, profound emotion. "Mom," she said, and her voice was thick with feeling, "I think it's best if you go back home now." She called me Mom, for the last time, and I didn't know. In that moment I only heard the love in the word, not the farewell. I only felt the decade of warmth it carried, so I smiled. It was a smile of gratitude for that word, for the title she had gifted me for so long. I smiled instead of crying, because I was clinging to the sound of it, not the meaning of her sentence. "Thank you," I said to her, to all of them, for everything. The car ride with Ben to the train station was quiet. He kept reaching over to hold my hand. "I'll visit all the time, Mom, every month." I nodded, squeezing his hand. I knew his life was here with his wife and son. The visits would become less frequent. Life would fill in the space I left behind, and that was as it should be. He stood on the platform, waving until the train rounded a bend and he was out of sight. I finally let the tears fall then. Silent, steady tears for what was lost, for what had changed, for the beautiful, painful necessity of it all. I held the resin block with the broken spoon in my lap, feeling its solid weight. It was my proof that I had been there, that I had loved, that I had broken things, and that I had been loved enough to be given a fragment of that breakage to keep. The train carried me away from the city, back towards the quiet hills of my youth. The landscape shifted, becoming more familiar yet utterly foreign. I was returning, but I was not the same woman who had left. That woman had been defined by her emptiness, then by her usefulness. Who was I now? I had no answer. The question sat with me in the train compartment, a silent travelling companion. For the first time in over 60 years, my future was a blank page. It was terrifying. And underneath the terror, like a tiny, fragile seed, there was something else. The faintest stirring of something that might, one day, feel like freedom. The first month in my apartment was the hardest. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence. It filled the rooms, heavy and watchful. I would wake up and for a split second, expect to hear Jamie's footsteps in the hall or the smell of Anya's coffee. Then the reality would crash in, fresh and cold every morning. I cried more in those first few weeks than I had in years. I cried for the loss, for the loneliness, for the terrifying quiet. I called Ben every day at first, my voice too bright, too cheerful. "I'm fine, sweetheart, the apartment is lovely." I could hear the worry in his voice. He knew I wasn't fine. But a routine, however fragile, began to form. I would make 1 cup of tea, not a whole pot. I would buy a single banana from the grocer down the street. I learned the rhythm of my own small life again. One afternoon, desperate to fill the hours, I pulled out a box labelled crafts. Inside were half-finished projects from another life. Some embroidery thread, a sketchpad, some watercolour paints Anya had given me once and I'd been too busy to use. I picked up a brush. My hand was unsteady. I dipped it in water, then in colour, and made a clumsy blue streak on the paper. It was ugly, but it was a start. I began to go for walks, not with a purpose, not to push a stroller or get groceries, just to walk. I noticed things I had forgotten. The way the light fell through the oak trees in the park at 4 p.m, the sound of the creek that ran behind the library, the face of the elderly man who always sat on the same bench feeding pigeons. One day I nodded to him. The next day I said, "Lovely afternoon." The day after that he said, "It is if the rain holds off." It was not a friendship. It was a connection, a tiny thread tying me to the world outside my own grief. Ben and Jamie came to visit as promised. It was a whirlwind weekend, full of loud joy and an underlying sadness. Jamie explored every inch of the apartment, declaring it cozy but small. When they left, the silence felt deeper, more profound than before. It was the silence after laughter, which is the hardest kind. But this time I didn't cry. I made another cup of tea. I looked at the messy watercolour I'd left on the table, or attempt at the maple tree outside my window. And I thought, tomorrow I'll try to get the green right. That was the turning point, not a big moment but a small shift inside me, from waiting for the past to return to facing the present. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I was the oldest by 30 years, my hands shook, my trees looked like blobs, but the young woman teaching the class said, "I love the feeling in that stroke, Ilara." No one had called me by just my name in a very long time. It sounded strange and wonderful. I began to have lunches with a few old friends who still lived in town. Our conversations were different now. We talked about our aches and pains, yes, but also about books, about the puzzling nature of our grandchildren's video games, about our own dreams, neglected for so long. One friend, Martha, was a fierce widow who gardened with a vengeance. She thrust a pot of rosemary into my hands one day. "It's hard to kill, start with this." I put it on my windowsill, it thrived. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a life. Not the life I had which was built around others, but a life that was simply mine. It was modest, it was quiet, but it was authentic. I painted terrible pictures, I grew herbs, I took long walks and began to recognize my neighbors. I still talked to Ben every week, but the calls grew less frantic on both ends. He would tell me about Jamie's soccer games, about Anya's new series. I would tell him about my painting class, about the novel I was reading. Our relationship was changing too. I was no longer his daily caretaker, but I was becoming his friend. His mother, yes, but a person separate from him. One evening, about 6 months after I'd left, I was on the phone with Anya. It was Jamie's birthday. We had a nice, easy conversation about the party. As we were about to hang up, she paused. "Ilara," she said, using my name, which felt right now. I saw the photos you sent Ben of your paintings. They're really good. There's one of a spoon in resin, it's powerful." "Thank you," I said, my throat tight. "I'm glad you're finding your way," she said, and I knew she meant it. There was no guilt between us now, just a quiet respect for the paths we were each walking. That night I sat in my quiet apartment. I looked at the resin block with the broken spoon, now sitting beside my thriving rosemary plant. I looked at my latest watercolor, a simple bowl of fruit, the shadows all wrong but the colors brave. I felt a pang, yes, a deep, enduring love for my family that would always have an ache in it, but I also felt something else, a sense of being whole, alone in this room. Not a fragment of someone else's life, but a complete, if slightly cracked, vessel of my own. I had gone to my son's home to help build a family, and in doing so I had lost myself in the blueprint. Leaving was the most painful thing I had ever done, but it was also the bravest. It allowed them to grow into their own space, and it forced me to finally, after all these years, build a space for myself. The lesson was not what I thought it would be. It wasn't about the ingratitude of children or the pain of agging. It was about love's final, most difficult form, release. Love that doesn't cling. Love that isn't a debt or a chain. Love that trusts enough to let go. And in that letting go I found a different kind of love, one for the woman I had forgotten I was. A woman who could sit in the quiet, hear her own thoughts and be enough. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. Anya doesn't call me Mom anymore. She calls me Ilara and I call her Anya. It is honest. Jamie's visits are precious, but they are visits. He has his own life as he should. Ben is my son and he loves me, but I am no longer the center of his world. And that is how it should be too. My life now is smaller, quieter, but it is mine. I tend to it. Some days are still lonely. Some days the silence feels too loud. But on other days I look at my messy paints, my growing herbs, the sunlight on my own floor, and I feel a calm I never knew when I was desperately trying to be indispensable. I had to lose the title Mom in that house to remember my own name, Ilara, and in the end that has made all the difference. If you are holding on too tight, if you are defining yourself only by your usefulness to others, if you are afraid of the quiet, my story is for you. There is pain in stepping back. There is grief in the empty space. But there, in that very emptiness, is where you can finally meet yourself. And that meeting, however late it comes, is the beginning of a different, peaceful kind of love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share a bit of your own in the comments below. Be kind to yourselves and to each other. Until next time.